And so on the YouTube version of the show today, I get to visit my friend Dr. Richard Baker and discover everything from his thoughts on Jesus to the financial environment to the state of the Galena-Crane rivalry. It's a very fun talk.
I just thinking, about the meeting that we had before the strokes in the middle of last summer, before I went out on the crazy adventure that I took to New York. It was just so cool to get to catch up with you and, then have everything, that I really thought that I knew where this was all going, and I had no idea.
And that's really such is life. I think this pandemic kind of shows us that what we think to be the path is really not the path at all.
Right. That's right. And so let's say that additionally in everything else, you are a pastor, and you tell me about the church that you have pastored and all that stuff.
Right. So I've been in ministry for several years. I was the guy who we'd go cruising, who made sure everyone got home safe, who'd been out drinking. And so, that's what I knew everybody lived because I drove them home. So that was the good thing in high school. But, I've been in ministry for several years and have pastored different churches. Most notably, one of your buddies, Joe Evans, and I started a church in Nixa called
that's right.
The Bridge. I was a missionary for the Southern Baptist Convention to start that church. And I started going to 100 homes a day, knocking on doors, introducing myself, and trying to convince people they need to know Christ. And then hired Joe like 2 months into it. And we took off, and I had one salary, and he and I split it. So we each made $13,000 to start a church, and we're both so proud that we did.
Well, that's cool. How is it now? What's going on now?
Yeah, so Joe and I aren't there anymore, but the church is still going. The church is 18 years old. It's in its own building. We bought the old Price Cutter building in Nixa and remodeled it and put the church in it. And, they literally started with my wife and I. The first Sunday, I passed the offering plate to her. She dropped our check, and I counted it. We're the first two members. And now I think they run around 350 people, and it's pretty great. When Joe and I were last together in ministry, both pastors, the church was around 300, and 80% of the ones who were there were either unbelievers or had not been to church before.
Really?
And so we really reached out to people, not just getting them from other churches, but reaching out to people who haven't been introduced to church yet.
And so that is totally cool. And so, in the midst of everything else, you have a career as a financial planner. And so tell me about that.
That's probably the strangest part of all, to grow up a poor kid in Stone County and in Galena, and to be in charge of millions of dollars for different wealthy people is interesting.
Right.
I've always had two parallel parts of my life. I've had the ministry, and then I've had finance.
Okay.
And I got my first investment license while I was still in my dorm room in 1996 at College of the Ozarks. College of the Ozarks. Yeah.
Okay.
I got my undergraduate at C of O, and then got my master's and doctorate later in life.
Okay, and where was that?
At Midwestern Seminary in Kansas City, Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And, I still do ministry. Now I do a different kind of ministry. I go to churches who are in financial trouble, and I help them financially, help them get restructured, help them kind of bail them out. And so I'm pretty good at problem solving with finance, so I kind of put those together.
Wow. And so what directions does that lead you?
What directions does that lead me?
Yeah.
Well, my last one.
That's a very good question, and take it whatever way you want to.
My last one has been a couple years ago. That was my most interesting one.
Okay.
It's called Hamlin Baptist Church. It was in the inner city Springfield.
Okay. I remember that. You were doing that stuff when we were talking last summer.
Right. Yeah, it was 126 years old, was going to close. And, I just went in and did an assessment of them, felt like they were strong. And I convinced them not to close down, but to stay alive. And I transferred their inner city property into an inner city mission called the Dream Center, and helped get that going, Springfield Dream Center. Yeah. And they work with the Zone 1 neighborhoods and do a great job there. And then I found them handling a property just north of Springfield. So I found the majority of their members lived near where I-44 and Route 13, Highway 13 meet. Okay. So I found some property on 13 Highway and designed them a building and built them a building, and then moved them into it, and then stepped out. And that was in my spare time doing investments as a full-time job.
And so anyway, that's the deal is I would really like to know, because you basically asked me to talk about the market and where you think this whole silly thing is going. And so now that the floor is yours, tell me where you think everything is going.
Everything is going to go. Well, unfortunately, I have the highest license I can get in the country, and this podcast is going to be monitored because I'm on it and I'm licensed.
Definitely.
So I can't give any financial advice, but I can tell you that the thing I feel about this differently. So I began doing investments in 1996. And I've been through two crises before. So 9/11 and then the 2008.
Right.
And both of those were more scary than this for me.
Yes, I agree.
And for me, because I didn't know the future, they were very open-ended. So 9/11, I didn't know we were going to go in World War III or what. I just didn't know. It was all a mess.
Yeah.
And then 2008, Bear Stearns closed. The company, the organization that we trusted to do ratings on the other companies.
Right.
So I really, I didn't know if the whole financial system was broken.
Right.
And so it was very open-ended. This time in 2020, it is different because I know there's an end goal. There's going to be a time when we all line up in Walgreens, 6 foot apart, in CVS and all these other pharmacies, and we all get a shot like the polio virus.
Right.
And when we get that, things will turn. Now, we may tread water until then, and the market's going to be, here and there.
It hasn't been as bad as I thought it would. It hasn't tanked the way I thought it could anyway.
Right. And, we're not out of that woods yet. The market is a forward-looking mechanism. And I think it's got the fear built in, but it hasn't got the economics built in. You just can't shut down the entire economy and see the effects. So I don't know if the market's really done that yet. So we could have some tough times before we have good times. But it will end. I think that it's going to turn around. It's going to be a lot better.
Good. Well, that is good to hear. And, in other words, you're also a Baptist preacher. And so, preach us a little bit. Talk to us about what we need to think about.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll start. The only way I know how to do that is just tell you my story.
Sure.
And you've probably floated the James River and put in it. They call it Kerr access, but us locals know it's the Horse Creek access.
Right.
And that little white church on Horse Creek Road is where I was saved.
Okay.
And I remember my family had been to that church. Both sets of my grandparents had went to that church. And it was a one-room schoolhouse when I was a boy. Really? It had no bathrooms. It had electricity. It had heat, but no running water. And I remember going to a baptism after church one Sunday, actually, strangely, at my grandfather's farm in the pond. And I remember seeing them baptize someone, and I remember them explaining that it wasn't the water that was saving them, but it was a description of them going down in the water, like their sins dying with Christ when he died, like we just celebrated with Easter. But then when we come back up, that we are like new again, born again. New. And it clicked. I'll never forget. I knew right then, as the first moment I knew, I had to be saved. And I was 10 years old, and I knew it connected. And that night we had church, back when churches had Sunday night service.
Right.
And not that I'm wanting those back, but I went to church that night, and I remember I was just praying, Lord, let somebody go forward. I want to be saved, and I didn't want to be first. And I don't know if you remember, Dale, Jamie Wilson. He was a really good basketball player for Hurley. You remember him?
That guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's still like 3 times stronger than me. He's just like muscle guy.
Really?
But so he was then anyway, but he went forward first, and he went to the left side of the altar, and I went to the right.
Okay.
And he barely beat me, but I wanted somebody else to go first. So as soon as he went, I went as well. And I remember just crying out my heart, saying, Lord, I'm sorry for all the stupid stuff I've done. And I started telling him everything I needed that I've done, just apologizing for it, for the, I was a mean kid and sarcastic and all that. And I knew right then that I couldn't earn my way into heaven. I knew that I'd never be good enough.
Right.
Even though as good as I could be wasn't close. And so I knew that I had to do it on somebody else's credit.
Right.
And that's what I do. I had to ask for Christ for him to forgive me of my stupidity and my pain and suffering and mess and bad stuff I'd done. But then I needed him to forgive me and let the death that he did, let his whippings count for mine. And I've explained this lots of times, Dale. This is the best way I know how to explain it. Back when there was royalty, not the ones who just, not the current ones, but the old days when they were real. So you had a prince, right? And he couldn't be spanked because he's royalty.
Right.
So when he did something wrong, they would bring in some other kid, a whipping boy. And they would put the whipping boy in, and the whipping boy would have to take a spanking, and the prince's punishment was to watch the whipping boy take a spanking he didn't deserve.
Uh-huh.
And that's when it clicked, when I started understanding that. That's what Christ did.
Right.
I messed up, and I needed a spanking. I deserved death, and I deserved hell. But he, the prince, pushed me aside and said, no, I'll take the spankings that he deserves. And he became my whipping boy.
Wow.
And I remember on that altar asking him to let the punishment he took count for me. And that's where it started, Dale.
That is wild. And, especially to think about, another great friend of mine, Jamie Wilson, who I've not thought about in years. It's just so cool to think about, how all of this connects. And that's the thing that, even the article that was written about me last night is just so interesting to see how if you just let God, do this stuff, I just think that the whole thing is just better to get out of the way.
I have to end there because for whatever reason, YouTube will only allow 15-minute clips. Whatever it is I do, I don't know what happens. But anyway, that's why you need to listen to DaleWileyShow.com, and you need to listen to 15minutemiracles.com and listen to more and get to hear the whole thing. Talk to you later.